Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's 2023 Sustainability Conference. My name is Jessica Dalzell, and I'm with the Recycling and Sustainability Unit at Ohio EPA, and I'm going to be moderating this afternoon's session, Feeding People, Not Landfills, Food Waste Reduction and Diversion. Ohio EPA's 2023 Sustainability Conference has 4 more sessions tomorrow, and then 4 more sessions on Thursday. Registration information and a conference agenda are located on the Ohio EPA's conference webpage. We hope that you'll be able to join us for additional sessions, and it's not too late to sign up for the next one. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate in this session. On this slide, you can see an example screenshot of your attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're having sound issues or if the slides stop advancing, please try refreshing your browser. If that does not work, try logging off and logging back in. If you continue to have issues, please let us know in the Q&A pane, and one of our behind-the-scenes team members will try to assist you. You can also submit questions to the presenters through the question pane, and you can do so by clicking on the question mark icon and typing them into that question panel. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will save all questions for the end for a Q&A portion with our presenters. You can click on the document icon on your interface to view a PDF file of the PowerPoint slides used for today's presentations. And this session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email along with the survey. The survey also appears once this session ends, and we do value your feedback and would greatly appreciate it if you could let us know how we are doing. Next, I would like to introduce our presenters. First up, we'll hear from Levi Grimm. Levi is the Executive Director of G Foods and an undergraduate student at Miami University in Oxford. Levi's path to rescuing excess food stemmed from a desire to learn how a business works, but his mindset quickly shifted from profits to people. Founded in a high school classroom in 2018, G Foods has orchestrated the recovery and distribution of over 7 million pounds of food from going to waste through a network of over 100 nonprofit organizations across the state. Shannon Tolliver is the Social Responsibility and Environmental Sustainability Manager at White Castle System, Inc. She directs and manages the company's environmental sustainability program, which includes reducing waste, energy, and water usage, as well as the sustainable sourcing program. Shannon also leads programs to engage and educate team members and customers about White Castle's environmental sustainability efforts. This includes publishing White Castle's Social Responsibility Report and annual reporting the social and governance criteria to the Carbon Disclosure Project. Nathan Rutz is a certified compost operations manager through the U.S. Composting Council. And according to Nathan, and I quote, "This means that he gets to drive big machines, start hundreds of seedlings, think critically about our social ecosystem, and talk about poo and corpses in a professional setting." Nathan works as Director of Soil at Rust Belt Riders Composting in Cleveland, which is a worker-owned cooperative that rescues food from the landfill and makes and sells compost and compost-based products for home gardeners and organic growers. I will now turn it over to our first presenter, Levi, to kick off with information about how G Foods diverts surplus foods to persons in need.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today. As Jessica mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of G Foods and excited to share a little bit about our food waste journey, from how we started as a class project many, many years ago, and now how we've made that into a nonprofit organization, now rescuing from over 50 businesses across Ohio and the Midwest and getting that out to nonprofits in need. So a little baseline information right as we get started, putting this into context. As I mentioned, we're doing food recovery, picking up that excess food that's perfectly good, and then getting that to a nonprofit in need, nonprofits ranging from your food pantries, food banks, veterans home, recovery shelters, wherever it may be, working with all of those different food businesses. And then what makes G Foods unique is that we're ran entirely by students. We work primarily at the high school level with some early undergraduate students. So every part of our business, from the operations, finances, whatever you can think of, is done entirely by high school students. And that really comes from how we got started in that classroom 5 years ago. This kind of sets the context for how we think about food recovery in our space. For us, we got started as a class project through a project at Ross High School and Butler Tech Career Schools, which is in Southwest Ohio. Our goal we were given through the United Nations. They chose our high school as one of 8 in the world, kind of look at these problems of the SDGs as Sustainable Development Goals and come up with solutions to them. Our class project, we were given SDGs, no poverty and zero hunger of 1 and 2. So they were just giving us these and then said, go find a solution to it. Think like a global citizen, act like a global citizen, and look at the issues in your own community, contextualize that in the global space, and then run with it. Do some type of action. So we worked with a team in South Korea and working on food. We recognized that food was the basis of what needed the foundation to be able to get the job, to be able to do the education and work your way up. So we needed to take a look at that in our local community. We are in Hamilton, Ohio, right outside of Cincinnati. It's a mixture of a rural town coupled right next to the smaller city landscape. And so not only were we growing the food in our own community, then not even 30 minutes away, we were facing Hamilton, Ohio, where 17% of our residents were living in poverty, over 62,000, with over 8,000 residents going to be in hunger. And these are even pre-COVID stats. You can imagine how that has just gone up over time. So there was this clear disconnect between the abundance and the need in our community. And we knew that we needed to look more into this. Was there an opportunity for our team to do something about it? And I'm sure the same situation resonates in many other communities across the state and then across the country. So we needed to do just that. Look at what does this problem look like? And we came and we found the conclusion that 40% of the food produced in the world is never used. Now that stat begs the question of why is this excess food that's perfectly good? Where's the link to it? It's commonly said that food waste is not a matter of the scarcity of it, but it's more of the logistics ends of getting that food to the people in need. That's where the missing link is. So why is food waste an issue? What is the climate impact of it? Surely we recognize the fact of the time that the farmers and the producers are putting in to make that product, but what's the environmental aspect of this look like? Wasted food on a global scale accounts for about 9% of emissions, and these are methane emissions, one of the most potent for the emissions released into the atmosphere. And then if you were to put that into a number sense, country by country, the US their food waste rather, would be the 3rd largest contributor to climate change. So all this essentially states that there is a large environmental piece to the food waste reduction that we need to tackle. And if we dive in, hone in on that a little bit more, 16% of cropland is used for food that's wasted, 24% of our landfill content, 22% of water. So what does this beg us to look at is that food waste really has so many other parts to it. Everything is interconnected. So not only can we use food as a method to get that to people in need, but then it can also support the environmental change that we're all looking to create. And so looking at food waste, this really sets the scene for why food rescue is an integral solution to this whole thing. If we look at where food waste is occurring, roughly half of it is occurring on the post-consumer end, looking at how people are wasting food at their home, whether they are overbuying, if they're not meal planning, whatever that may be, that's a whole nother conversation. But roughly 50% of this food waste is occurring at the home level. Where our organization primarily works is a little bit more upstream, working with the food producers, the manufacturers, the stores, the restaurants, the cafeterias. We work and focus on that. So there's still a large gap that can be rescued of the food in that sense. And this graph here and the next one I'll be showing are both published by ReFed for this year, 2023. So if we look at then the places upstream, what food is going to be wasted? It's the produce, the prepared food, and then your dairy. Those are the 3 main categories of the wasted food. And so when you look at this and then make the connection to what do food pantries need? Well, those are one of the largest food groups that they're looking for. So there's this clear connection that we can make between this excess food and getting it to people in need. But then what this also shows us is that the food that we're going to be working with is going to have short turnaround times with it. So we need to make sure that food rescue and essentially the solutions are scalable and have flexibility built in to be able to get it to them before the food would need to go bad or need to go to compost or anything else. So where does that bring G Foods back in the picture? We saw the issues, we recognize that there's a solution here. So we took the project and then we made that into an organization, acting upon what we saw, and that came into the picture of G. And G, we believe in a lot more than just food rescuing. Food rescue is the core of what we do, but there's so many pieces to it. If we're gonna make this large scale change, a systems change, even if you will, then we need to harness innovation and creativity in how we're working and making solutions that are not only hyper-focused on what the community needs, but scalable to the larger state and to the country, while keeping that global focus just like how we got started with. So that brings us to our 3-seed approach. This is how we're going to accomplish our dual mission of solving hunger and solving poverty. So our 3-seed approach, and this is where we get the acronym for G, comes from jobs, education, economy. More specifically, a lack of jobs, a lack of education, and an unstable economy. So we recognize, as I talked about before, that food is the foundation. So how can we then use food as this vehicle to solve all these other different problems to kind of begin to start tackling the poverty cycle? For us, how that looks like for our organization is using food in the food rescue process to teach trainings with volunteers and our student employees, whether that's food safety certifications, how to work in a warehouse, forklift certifications. We're able to then provide these credentials that can help them find employment. Education, the exact same thing, providing for particularly our students in this case, those real world experiences on how they're solving these issues. And then as a whole in the economy, not only can then they get a job and contribute to the economy, but then it's also about that economic impact of the wasted food that we're preventing from going to waste and how we're keeping that throughout the economy. So we're going to now dive into food rescuing. What are we doing on a day-to-day basis? Our organization will be the first to admit that we're not the first ones to do food rescuing. Food rescuing has been around for hundreds of years. It's not just done by food rescue organizations. It's done many times by your local food pantry, picking up from a Kroger or Walmart store. But what food rescue brings and what our organization brings is that we're that one organization that we can clearly have the donors come to us. We know where the need is, and then we can kind of filter that out to the nonprofits, kind of take this manpower, if you will, or all the work off of our nonprofits to focus on what they do best. And then we can kind of take on that logistical burden of getting it from point A to point B. And what does that look like? That looks like being scalable and flexible. That's exactly what all food rescue is about, is scaling. When that begins with collection. As I said before, we work with roughly 50 food donors, and they are from every single part of the food system. You can see up in the top right corner of your screen that we work with Starbucks. So these are small quantities of food, but then we work with Kroger, which are larger quantities of food. And Dannon, the same instance from Dannon, we rescue thousands of pounds of yogurt. So food rescue is able to be that scalable solution. To be the large quantities of food, we say from the SUV of food to a semi of food, food rescue can be the solution, and our organization can kind of be there to fit that need. So collection from each of these donors. I talked about we need to be flexible in how we do it. So our donors can set up weekly reoccurring patterns with us. They could do one-off events, whether it's a caterer that had excess at the end of the event and they give us a call. We can be there, or we can pick up every single day from the store. From there, we use a volunteer-powered, technology-driven network, I guess you could say, to get this food. What does that mean is that through a technology platform called Food Rescue US, volunteers can sign up and then they can look for available food rescues. This is a food rescue being the food available, this is where it needs to go. Can you be that integral piece in the middle to get that food to where it needs to be? So we use community volunteers to then use their own cars to transport this food. Typically a food rescue is from point A to point B, is a no more than a 20-minute drive. So we're keeping that food local with also adhering to those food safety standards. And while mentioning the food safety standards, this is kind of a big part to mention. One of the biggest questions from people that are just hearing about food donation or food rescuing is that liability question. It comes up time and time again. And there are federal protections that protect food donors from any liability as long as it was done in good faith, that being the Good Samaritan Act, which was later amended just last year by the Food Donation Improvement Act. So there is widespread support from a legal side on food rescue. So a lot of our work needs to come from talking to these donors about that liability protection and how that can look in their case. And then that food, once it's in the volunteer's car, goes directly to the distribution point. As I said before, in 20 to 30 minutes, it's right there on the doorstep of when the nonprofit needs it. And we're able to then look at what nonprofit could use that food, when are they open, we can manage that work. As I said before, we're not the first to do food rescuing. And so what does this look like maybe before a food rescue organization came about? It was the person at the loading dock at the store calling the food pantry saying we have excess food. Well, then what happens if that food pantry can't do it? Does that food just go to waste, or will the manager take the extra time to call 5 other pantries? As you can imagine, most of the time for these businesses, the answer is going to be they're not going to have the manpower to do that, to call all the different pantries. So if they're instead able to call us as the central organization, we can take on that work of calling each of the other organizations to kind of figure out where this food can be. And that goes into another point of food rescue being the and. What do I mean by that is that many of these times, Food waste reduction has many different parts and solutions to it. Composting is a great way to do it. Food rescue is a piece of the puzzle. We're not the full solution, but we can be a piece of it, and we can work alongside these businesses that already have existing outlets, but we can just play a role in that. And now we're going to go through two examples of some great companies that we've worked with before on how they've been able to kind of work with us and establish a food rescue program. And one is 80 Acre Farms. 80 Acre Farms is an amazing, innovative, creative company. They're actually based in Hamilton, Ohio, and they do indoor farming. It's very technology, robots everywhere, but they were producing lots and lots of food. And so we were able to then work with them to have a volunteer pick up their excess lettuce. In this case, we've been working for them for nearly 2 to 3 years now. So they started with sustainability in mind. And so then they knew that food rescue was a piece of that puzzle. And so to date, we've rescued nearly 40,000 pounds of food from them. And this could be, as you can see in the pictures, it can be giant trash bags of lettuce, or it can be those prepackaged salads. So another reason why food rescue is such a great solution is that organization knows the needs of our nonprofits, and we can direct that food to where it needs to go. So as you can imagine, that with this large scale lettuce, that isn't best for a pantry that has the clients coming in grabbing the food that they need, but that could be great for a community kitchen or someone that's doing a community meal. So we, as the food rescue organizations, are the one that are tasked with finding out this outlet for it to go. And that company doesn't have that burden of figuring out, well, can I donate this? Could they use this? Who can use it? We work with that before. So it really makes this as easy as possible for the donor. And that's one of the things that as we do a food rescue program is super important for us. How can we take every single burden that we can off of the company? How can they just call and say, Levi, this is what food we have available. Can you pick it up? And I can say yes to them and not have to ask them 10,000 different questions, not have to ask them or plan out everything with them over the phone. They can just say, we have this available. Can you be there? Saving that company time and resources while making food donation as easy as possible for them. Another company that we've worked with is actually Miami University and Aramark. Miami University is one of our newer donors. We've worked with them for just over one academic semester, and so far they've already donated 5,000 pounds of food. But what's so unique about Miami University's story is how we were able to almost build a coalition around it. With Miami University, we were able to start with a single donor, a single dining hall on campus. Once we were able to kind of prove ourselves, we got that initial yes, and then built the program from there. Then we were able to scale, and now we're in all the dining halls, we're doing our markets on campus, we're looking at catering. So it just goes to show how we needed many different parties to kind of buy into this. But then once we were able to have that really strong foundation, we were able to grow. So it's getting that initial yes from a donor that allowed us to grow so much. So our organization, beyond these small scale food rescues, we're also working on the large scale, recognizing that food waste occurs at the small level, but also at the big level. And so our organization has a warehouse in the downtown of Hamilton. We're able to receive rejected semis of food, or if a producer produces many semis of excess food, then we have our own logistic networks of truckers, of box trucks, of nonprofits. They're able to go pick up that food directly from that donor. So again, it's reducing how much work that is required for a donor, because they can just say, we have it available, we'll get the transportation, we'll be that logistics piece to kind of solve that puzzle. But we're not the only ones, specifically in Ohio and Southwest Ohio, doing food recovery. Our organization is part of a larger coalition, or this network of Food Rescue US, which is a national nonprofit that provides a technology solution for logistic organizations like ours to kind of solve this gap. And so Food Rescue US kind of has two separate models in the communities. They have what's called a licensee model that allows existing nonprofits like a G Foods to use their software application to manage their logistics, moving away from the Excel, using software built for food recovery. And then the other model to this is more of a community-based model. They allow individual community members or a group of community members to say, I want to start a food recovery site, and then they provide the training and resources to do that. So this is great, where if you're looking to bring food recovery to your community, you don't need the giant organization to do it. It can be this small coalition that you build together. And like I mentioned, they use a technology platform. What does this do? It allows the logistic organization to say, this is the food available, and then this is who it needs to go. And it provides that solution for the volunteers to then log on and claim that rescue. So it manages all the logistics to make it where the program can almost run itself, where you're only tasked with following up, sending reports, doing more of the data analysis, rather than being on the phone calls with all of the different organizations. And so if we just look now at the state of Ohio, what does food recovery look like there? There are many different organizations out there. These aren't the only ones by any means. There are probably ones that I've missed in other parts of the state, and even individual pantries doing it. But in Cincinnati, where we're based, there's 3 different organizations doing it. There's some in Columbus, Akron, Ohio, and then Cleveland, using different technology platforms, using different systems. But we're looking to bring food recovery to other places in the state. This allows us to be able to have a greater network of donors once we know that there's this larger footprint, and then all of us are able to work together, where if there's a place in Hamilton where we have food, we can frequently send that to Columbus, or we can work together. So this is all to say that there's more recovery opportunities that are available in other parts of the state. And there's a little bit of work already there, but more can be done. And so as we get to the end, what is our impact? What has our organization been able to accomplish? As mentioned in the introduction, we've recovered over 7.5 million pounds of food to over 100 nonprofits across 3 different states. The climate impact, 17 million pounds of methane emissions diverted, and then we're working with those food donors from all across the supply chain. But there's much more where we could go. I touched on that we're focused on innovating, bringing innovation to this. So with that, we are looking to emphasize the fresh food access. How can we make sure that we're not only getting more donors, but making sure that's reaching the communities that are the food deserts that really need that fresh produce? And then how can we expand our logistics arms? How can we get more semis? How can we get more volunteers and delivery drivers for this? That's a dual piece to that, right? Because you need the volunteers to have the small cars, but then you need the large trucks to kind of work together as this coalition all the way around. So organizations, we like to say, grow to meet the need, and that we're going to keep going until all food is recovered, which is hopefully a solution that one day we'll reach there in the end. But just to conclude, thank you again and for listening and for being a part of this. If you're doing any food recovery work, please let me know. I want to hear about it. I want to learn from you. We're always looking to grow. If you're looking for food recovery to come to your community, or if you know of a business that has excess food, no matter how much, no matter if you're by Cincinnati or not, happy to have that conversation and look for that solution. So if you're not rescuing food or participating, love to get you started. But thank you again for allowing me to share my story today, and I'll pass it back over.
Thank you so much, Levi. That was great. We will now hand it over to Shannon to cover how White Castle reduces food waste at their facilities.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to briefly talk about White Castle's history and who we are if you don't know, if you haven't visited us at like 2 a.m. in the morning. And then I will talk about our food waste diversion journey. So we were founded in 1921. So yes, we are a 102-year-old company. We were founded by 2 business owners, Walt Anderson and Billy Ingram. Billy was the chef, kind of. He had the idea, and Walt Anderson was more of the businessman. And so they got together and they had $700 and they opened their first White Castle, and they supposedly paid the debt off within a couple months and were debt free for a long time, and always tried to expand using cash that they had available. So since we're a 102-year-old company, I would briefly go through the timeline. So we started in 1921. In the 1930s, we had 130 locations, and we moved our headquarters to Columbus, Ohio. So a lot of people think that we started in Columbus, Ohio, but again, we also actually started in Wichita, Kansas. We moved our headquarters here because we had a lot of castles on the East Coast, New Jersey, and in New York, and so it was more centrally located to move our headquarters to Columbus, Ohio. In the 1940s, we established our pension and profit sharing plans and our White Castle Foundation. Our founder believed that if you treat your team members with loyalty, they will give you loyalty back. So he really emphasized taking care of our team. In the 1950s, we had a patent for our 5 holes. People think we are trying to skimp on the meat, but actually our cooking process is one of steam. And so we steam the hamburgers over onions, and the 5 holes in our patty allow the steam to go to our buns and make them soft and tasty. In the 1960s, we sold our 1 billionth hamburger, and our founder, Billy Ingram, passed away. He had 1 son, and he took over the business after that. In the 1970s, we opened our first drive-through, which sounds so interesting it's just 1970s. And then in 1980s, Bill was Edgar's son, became president and CEO, and we launched WCD, which is our retail division. So Bill's idea was, there's this new invention called the microwave, and a lot of the castles were already making extra hamburgers and freezing them and selling them to customers. And so his idea was, why can't we mass market these and put them in the grocery stores? And supposedly he went to, a manufacturer, and they said, oh, nobody will buy those. And he persisted and built his own plant. And now we have 3 retail plants, and we sell all over the United States in retail outlets. So it was a success. All due to the microwave invention. So in the 80s, we also expanded to new markets such as Nashville and Northeast Ohio. In the 1990s, we launched our first web page. We expanded internationally. We were in China for a little bit. We went to Mexico City as well. The cheeseburger was named the food product of the year. In the 2000s, we launched Brand and Brand. And if you think about in the 2000s, this is when a lot of kind of fast casual restaurants were popping up. We actually had a barbecue concept. We had a panini sandwich shop, and we also had a noodle place. And so we did not, those lasted for a couple years. They did not do well, not that they didn't do well, but we actually learned a lot about how to differentiate our menu offerings, how to kind of improve our operations. And so even though those brands did not succeed, they taught us a lot. We continue to remodel our older buildings. We still have a lot of porcelain steel buildings out there, and so we're continued to remodel those. In the 2010s, we launched an online ordering and delivery. Of course, we expanded to new markets, and we launched our Impossible slider, and we also have a Dr. Parego's sandwich as well. We expanded retail, and Lisa, which was Bill's daughter, became the president and CEO. We also, in 2014, were named Time Magazine's most influential burger of all time. So that's a basically brief timeline of our long history. We are still a privately owned company. We don't franchise. And so we are happy that we are still family owned. This is just kind of a map of where we started. Again, we started in Wichita, Kansas. We had 4 in Wichita. We kind of stayed in that area a little bit, started to expand east. As you can see, some of the markets kind of dropped off in our Kansas City area. We were in Miami, Florida for about 8 years. We had a lot of the Western cities. We expanded to Las Vegas. And we also went to Florida. We're in Orlando right now. So again, we have 340 company-owned stores in 11 regions. We do have 3 licensed locations in Las Vegas, and 2, we call them destination castles. These are the ones in Arizona and Florida. And we really realized that there's a lot of Midwest people who live in these areas and who would always be like, you should open a castle here. You should open a castle here. So we thought, you know what, we will try it. And I've been to both of those openings, and I'll tell you, there's a 4 or 5 hour line for those. And for me, myself, I'm like, there's no way I would wait 4 or 5 hours for a product, which is going to be in my city. I would just go like a month later. But we have some very diehard cravers that love our products. So these putting these in these destination locations has been a success for us. So again, I kind of talked about our founder had a passion for the team members. This black and white pictured over here is a woman who worked for us for 67 years. And we always joked that when people had 15 years of service, that they only had 15 years of service, they only had 52 more to go. So we give them a pin. So this is the pin that they're showing. We have 25-year club, which is actually this week, where we have people who have been working for White Castle for 25 years. We fly them in. We have a couple dinners. We give them a watch. And it's a great event to appreciate our team members that have been here. Some other pictures we have 100 hours of service. Each department does 100 hours of service throughout the year. And so we love to get out in the community and support everyone. And then in National Hamburger Month is in May, and all home office team members have to work in a castle for a few hours. And it really just brings us back to that is the hardest job, working in a castle. For White Castle is. And so you appreciate, when you do go work in the castle, you do appreciate how hard our team members work. We have a passion for product. the black and white picture is one of our first bags that we produced. And when we first opened, we only had 4 products. We had Coke. We've been a partner with Coke for the whole time we've been operating. Apple pie was the second one. You could get coffee and you could get a slider. So I love the apple pie. I think that was probably pretty cute. People coming into the diner and sitting down and eating apple pie. But again, we've had to adapt to the changing times. We have the Impossible slider, which was a huge success, and that was really to, have different offerings. So if you were, like, we call it to go for the veto vote. So if you're a family and you have a vegetarian in your family, or you just have someone who doesn't want a hamburger, you are able to still come to White Castle and get an Impossible slider. We have our breakfast sandwich, which I always tell people this. If you have not tried our breakfast sandwich, it is actually really good. It's a real egg. It's on our bun. It's served 24 hours. So if you have never tried anything of ours, I would try the breakfast sandwich. And we also, the bottom picture is of our retail products. We have a lot of different options. And so really tailoring our product for our customers, while still keeping to our original slider is our motto. We have a passion for creating memorable moments. The picture to the right with all the people, that is our Cravers Hall of Fame. And the joke is that it's harder to get into a Cravers Hall of Fame than it is into Harvard. We actually get thousands of applications of people telling us their crazy stories of driving all over the United States to get to a White Castle. We've had people try to visit every White Castle in 1 year. We've had marriages at White Castle. And so we have thousands of applications. We pretty much induct probably 10 people a year. And it's a great ceremony. This was at our home office. We have some celebrities that have been inducted into our Cravers Hall of Fame. The person, Adam Richman, is in the picture on the top right. He is the Man vs. Food guy. We had Alice Cooper, as you can see there. We've had Monica Day, Stan Lee, who kind of created the Marvel Comics, and Telfar, who's a fashion designer. So we've had a lot of fun celebs in there, as well as our Cravers. We were in a movie called Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. If you have not seen it, it's actually pretty funny, and it really does depict some of our Cravers' journey to visiting White Castles. We were on Undercover Boss as well. And yes, we have had people get White Castle tattoos. I don't have one, but some Cravers do. So those are some of the passions that we had, our brief history of White Castle. We have been around for 100 years. We've had to be really efficient through the Great Depression, through world wars. And so we have always built in environmental sustainability within our history. And so this is our current environmental sustainability policy. When I talk about environmental sustainability within White Castle, I really talk about creating goods and services, because we're always going to create goods and services, but we can do it using fewer resources, creating less waste and pollution, and improving the quality of life for our team members, as well as the community. We have 3 main pillars. Is waste reduction, of course. We are a food company. We do concentrate on food waste reduction and just waste reduction in general. Efficiency, we do have big buildings, we have plants, we have castles that use a lot of refrigeration, a lot of energy, cooking as well. And so we try to purchase the most efficient products that we can and try to renovate when we are able. And then transparency. This is, if you're into environmental sustainability, the environmental sustainability field has really changed in the past 10 years from being more low-hanging fruit energy efficiency to more about transparency. Customers and team members want to know where we're buying our food from, how our food is sourced, what nutritional information is in our food. And so transparency is a very large pillar of our environmental sustainability program. So moving on. So we began our food waste diversion journey in 2013. We started with Columbus Castles, and we just kind of piloted it, like, hey, let's try this out. Let's see how it goes. Went really well. We were able to move it up to 16 castles by November. And it was interesting to see the range of which each castle would put into the containers. So we had on a monthly average, it was 700 to 2,000 pounds. And these were 95-gallon toters. And the system of collecting the food is pretty important to us. And so this was our first run of having any food waste diversion. But these were 95-gallon toters, and they were taken. So when they would come to pick them, they would pick up the whole container and drop off new containers. So they wouldn't dump it, they would just take the whole container. And this program worked for about a year and a half, and we ended up having to close it in 2014 due to the composting facilities closing, some within Central Ohio. And so it was a great run. I was really kind of sad to see it kind of go, but we just, my philosophy is I didn't want to send, the product to Michigan or some other state because, the transportation costs and even the environmental hazards of doing that were just not worth it. So we closed the program then. But I learned that educating our team members was very important about why we're doing this. And so I would use this tool of like, hey, our sandwiches, you put them in the compost bin and then they make this compost. And on Earth Day, I took bags of compost to a couple castles and we planted flowers. And we had signs that says, how does our garden grow with onions and fries and community ties? And it was a great message to reinforce to our team members. I realized that I didn't do as much education as I wanted to because some of the team members were like, oh, is this why we're doing the program? I was like, yeah. So they were all on board once they got the training, but this was great to share with them and have them participate in it. We have a Vandalia retail plant, and this was opened in January of 2014, and it is LEED certified gold. And within the LEED certification, we have this as a almost waste-free manufacturing facility. So we started this plant opening with diverting the food waste. We were able to divert, 7,000 pounds of food diverted weekly, which is a lot. We had to, again, with the Columbus pilot, we did have to close this program that same year at the end of December due to composting facilities closing. And this was really hard too, because as a plant opening up and being waste-free, to have to shut that down was hard. But we still donate 32,000 edible sliders per month to the local food bank. And as Levi was saying, it is really easy. We just put them all into a Gaylord in the freezer. And these are pretty much sandwiches that are in the wrap. If you've ever gotten retail product, there are 2 sandwiches in a film wrap. And so these might be, the bun's twisted or it's half a piece of cheese. It just doesn't meet our standards, but it's still edible. And so we put all these products into a large Gaylord in the freezer, and then once a month we call the food bank and they come and pick it up. So super easy to do, and we are so glad that we can donate these products. Our Cincinnati, we have a bakery in Cincinnati, and they divert 60 tons a month of bread and dough to an animal feed plant, and we've been doing this for a long time. And it's been great. It's we actually have a compactor for this product, and we're actually we're making the system better because we have to take the food outside and put it in the compactor and want to kind of enclose it. And so it's going to be a great process. So all of these little efforts do make a difference when you have plants and facilities. So our home office, if you're not aware, we are in Columbus, Ohio. We had a really old building. Like I said, we moved here in 1934, and we had been in that building for 80, 90 years, super inefficient. It leaked all the time when it rained. We had a manufacturing facility in the back, and we just weren't using the space right. So we tore down that building, built a new building, a LEED certified gold building as well, and we divert 180 pounds to a local aerobic digester. All back of the house. We use reusable dishware, and we store this food in 5-gallon buckets. So they bring the buckets either under the grills in the cafe or when they're cleaning off the dishes, close the lid, they get stacked, and then the hauler comes, picks them up, and brings us new clean buckets. So this program's been going very well, and I think our team members really enjoy it. And during Earth Day, we have an Earth Day Fair week at the home office. We try to talk about it then so that our team members remember that we're participating in this. So we've had a few just out-of-state food waste diversion. We had in Hennepin County, we received a grant from Hennepin County to do a pilot program for 7 castles. Again, the average weight per month was around 2,000. We began this and had to stop it a year later. This was an example of why the container, I'll talk about that in my lessons learned, but the container, especially for a food waste facility, needs to be super clean. So these containers that we were using from this hauler, they were a 95 gallon. They didn't have locks on them or anything, but we had composting bags. And so the team members would put the food in the composting bag, tie it off, and then after every day, get a new composting bag and kind of put it in there. And then the hauler would come and then dump the 95 gallon toters. So, which sounds good, but sometimes either the bags broke or, we had squirrels getting into these containers, and which ended up creating flies and not so good looking, trash facility in the back of our castles. And we couldn't risk the brand of it being, someone taking one picture and it being like a ton of flies or a squirrel in there, or, maggots or anything. We can't risk that reputation of one picture being put out there and being, people aren't going to care that White Castle is trying to do the right thing of diverting our food waste. It's going to be, this place is gross, they have flies everywhere. So we stopped that program after about a year because it just wasn't worth it for us with this place. And New York City has a they call it a commercial organics requirement, and all castles are diverting food waste there. So any basically restaurant in New York City should be diverting their food waste. So we are participating in that. And that program's going well. That's been a year. It started in July of last year. So it's been a year and a few months. So this just brings me back to, I really wanted to just kind of wrap up. So those are our kind of food waste diversion pilots. Again, we've done a lot. I've learned a lot from all of these different food waste diversion programs. And one of the big lessons is that the containers must be cleaned on site or new ones brought back. That is key for me when I'm considering either new markets or new programs, is because again, if you're bringing in buckets, again, the buckets need to be really clean. We have health inspectors come to our castles. Since we are a food establishment, every food establishment has health inspectors come. They come randomly, and we really have to make sure that everything is clean. And so that's really important to make sure that these containers are cleaned well. The bag liners work, but if you have a leak or a hole in it, it can be an issue. And again, we try to optimize the number of pickups, since we are a quick service restaurant, so we don't prepare food. The food is made to order, so we don't really have that much food waste, and so the containers would be picked up usually once a week, not more than once a week, because again, we have to keep the costs low. So trying to stretch out a week full of food sitting in a container is rough, but it can work. But we just have to make sure that the containers are secure, the compostable bag liners are working. And so that's one of the lessons learned, is make sure that the compostable bags are working. And those are expensive too. I think they're like at some point they were like $1 a bag. So, again, we need to make sure that it's affordable. Again, and this reads into my third point, is it must be cost neutral or close. So what I found out was diverting these food waste from the castles does not reduce our landfill pulls that much. So maybe you could say on average, our castles have an 8-yard of trash and an 8-yard of recycling. And so the 8-yard of trash is probably picked up on average 2 times a week, maybe once a week, depending on the season. And so doing food diversion does not reduce our the amount of waste in a trash container. And so those are not picked up by weight. It's just picked up when it's full. And so I maybe had a few instances where the trash was picked up 3 times a week, and I could go down to 2 times a week, and that would save some money, which would divert the cost of the food waste hauling, but it didn't do it in most instances. So we need the cost to be pretty cost neutral or close. My fourth bullet is just make sure there are different food waste diversion outlets. You know, again, I think now the infrastructure is getting much better. There's anaerobic digesters, there's aerobic digesters, there are, you know, composting facilities, and our next speaker can, you know, talk to that. But it's nice to have different outlets. So if something happens to one of the places that we take the food to, there are other outlets, so you don't have to just close down the program. And so I think that's getting better as the years have gone by, that there's a lot of different more options than there were, say, 10 years ago. It'd be nice to partner with other companies to make more of a fixed route, you know, like an old milk run where you'd go to like, we've had different discussions within the region of this. And so just kind of getting organizations together to kind of look at this would be great. And then lastly, the team members really caught on quickly with reinforcement and continuous training. They really, when they're working in the castle, they really have a set procedure of, you know, this is the only thing with gloves. We really had to emphasize the plastic gloves obviously do not go into the composting bin, they go in the trash. So we really just had to reinforce that. But again, in the locations where we're still doing this, or we're doing it in the home office, and even in our New York facility, you know, our contamination is really low because again, this is just back of the house. It's not front of the house, but once you get the team members trained and they understand why they're doing it, it catches on pretty well. And so those are my lessons learned from the pilots that we've done.
Thanks, Shannon. And next we will hear from our last speaker, Nathan, about how Rust Belt Riders utilizes food scraps to create soil.
So the name Rust Belt Riders comes from the fact that we're in the city of Cleveland, which along the southern Great Lakes, if you're not familiar, there used to be a whole lot of manufacturing, but now there's not a whole lot of manufacturing. So it's called the Rust Belt. And we started in riders because we started off on bicycles. Back in 2014, the two folks that started it, Michael and Dan, were working at a restaurant in the city of Cleveland called Spice Kitchen and Bar, which unfortunately didn't make it through through COVID. But they were working at this table to farm, or sorry, farm to table restaurant, and table to farm is what we now call our food scrap rescue. And they were like, man, there's all this really good food that's coming from these local farms, and even at this restaurant that is like doing its best to practice nose to tail butchery and use all parts of the plants, we're still ending up with a whole lot of food waste. So also at the time, the city of Cleveland was having a big push toward implementing community gardens, and there were high tunnels being handed out left and right by the USDA. So there's all these high tunnels all over the city of Cleveland. And there's all these community gardens, some old, some new. We do have some really amazing old community gardens in the city of Cleveland. The Ben Franklin Garden, which is at Ben Franklin Elementary School on the near west side of Cleveland, has been around as a community garden since the early 80s. And the Kentucky Garden in Ohio City, which is also on the near west side of Cleveland, was a World War II victory garden. So we've got some really long-running, pretty amazing community gardens in the city of Cleveland. So the original idea was to, one second, I'm gonna see if I need to download something to send it to somebody. The original idea was to take food scraps from restaurants and other places that we're picking up from and bring them by bicycle to community gardens. Okay. So that worked pretty well for about the first 6 months, but it didn't take long before the community gardens weren't actually doing that great of a job composting the material. So unfortunately, instead of creating beautiful soil at a bunch of different community gardens, we ended up with piles of slime, really stinky piles of slime at community gardens, and then community gardens that didn't want to keep accepting food scraps. So there were a couple that were good enough at composting that we did manage to keep bringing food scraps to them, but most of the time we didn't. So luckily for us, we started partnering with larger organizations that have Class 2 composting facilities, which we'll talk about later. So then we just grew little by little, Started off on bicycles. After a bike accident about 9 months in, we switched from bicycles to a pickup truck, then from the pickup truck to a cargo van, then from the cargo van, we added a lift gate on that cargo van, and then we got a box truck. And so we've been just growing and growing and growing little by little every year. And when you start off from absolutely nothing, it doesn't take very long to double and double and double in size. So we've been doing that. And one of the interesting things about us is that we started out really not knowing what we were doing at all. None of us came from farming or construction or logistics backgrounds. So this was just like, here's a problem, we're going to do something about it, and now we're going to figure out, now comes the fun part, we're going to figure out how to actually do it. So we've been at that project for the last 9 years, and I'm happy to say it's still going and we're still growing. So we started off, when you start off a food rescue or a composting operation, you typically start by reporting the amount of weight that you pick up in pounds, and eventually you graduate into reporting it in tons. And so we got to that point in around 2020 when we switched from reporting in pounds to reporting in tons, because there's 2,000 pounds in a ton, and so it sounds like a huge number. You get these huge numbers that we've diverted this many millions of pounds, but then when you look at the scale of the problem, we're landfilling millions of tons of food scraps a year in this country. And according to ReFed, just in Ohio, we're landfilling 1.4 million tons of food every year and composting about 500,000 tons. So just the scale of the problem is absolutely ridiculous. So there's so much yet to go. So where we are today, we're hauling about 2,500 tons of food scraps, which is quite impressive given that we were doing in the thousands of pounds in the first couple of years. And we started off with 2 people. Now we have about 30 employees. And we're a worker-owned cooperative. There's currently 5 worker owners, and we're about to add 9 more, which is really exciting for us. And we have 3 parts of our business. I'm really excited to show you pictures of these 3 parts of our business once we get the PowerPoint up and running. So the 3 parts of the business are commercial hauling, residential hauling, and what we call tilth soil. So commercial hauling is where we pick up from restaurants, grocery stores, breweries, coffee shops, all those kinds of places. We have about 175 customers in the greater Cleveland area. We pick up from about 235 locations every week, and that's where the 2,500 tons a year comes from. And so like Shannon was talking about, we deliver clean 64-gallon toters. We don't use 96s because those are too heavy for people to move when they're really full, especially if you're dealing with like a brewery that has wet brewery grain coming out. Because even our 64-gallon toters can end up being about 400 pounds a piece, which becomes really difficult to deal with as a human moving these things around. So we cut off at 64 gallons rather than going for the 96s. And then we pick up all kinds of different organizations. So our single biggest customer is the Heinen's grocery store chain. And Heinen's has 18 stores in the greater Cleveland area. They're a high-end grocery store. One of the things that's really cool about them is that they bring in a lot of local food grown in the Northeast Ohio area, which we'll come back to later. But we'll pick up pretty much anything. Yeah.
I just wanted to hop in to let you know that you should have control of your slides if you want to go ahead and get us to where you're at. So sorry about that.
Thanks. There we go. Yeah, so there they are. Michael and Dan in the early days. Yep, okay, there we go. And a couple years later, and that's earlier this year, that's our whole growing giant team these days. So we're talking about commercial hauling. And there's Dorian moving some toters around. This is what our trucks look like. We now have a fleet so we've gone from bicycles to having a fleet of 5 box trucks and 2 cargo vans. We'll talk about the cargo vans in a minute. And we service all types of different customers, and we have different size containers to be the right size for their facility. because we work with some coffee shops that have really tight facilities, so the 32-gallon container works better than the 64. We work with hospitals, so we really have to keep things clean because we're pulling these food scrap toters out of university hospitals, out of the Cleveland Clinic, and those places aren't going to let us have disgusting toters. Of course, our toters aren't perfect. Sometimes they leak, but we have communication with our customers, and we pull those toters if they leak and replace them with fresh ones. This is a map of where all of our current commercial customers are. These are all the 247 places that we pick up from around the Cleveland area. So residential hauling, when we first started off, we did both commercial and residential by bicycle. Then we stopped doing residential because it didn't make sense for us with the cargo van. We couldn't figure out how to make that work logistically. But now we've started that up again. We started that up again in 2019. And we've got two parts of that business. So what Cass is showing here, we pick up from people's houses in a 5-gallon bucket. But we also have, we have much greater participation from our 2,200 drop-off customers. And the drop-off customers have 25 locations around the greater Cleveland area, where this is at Lakewood Park. Is that Lakewood Park? No, that's not Lakewood Park. This is one of our, is that Lakewood Park? I think that's Lakewood Park. So there's 25 locations around the city of Cleveland. This is all of them, where people can drop off into locked containers anytime, day or night. And we partner either with a business or a church or a municipality to put those bins in a publicly accessible place so people can drop off their food scraps. And so the pickup program is quite a bit more expensive because there's a lot more labor involved. We power wash every single bucket every single time. Like Shannon was mentioning, the compostable plastic bags are quite expensive, so we actually phased those out because it didn't actually save us any time in terms of what we needed to do to clean those buckets. So we are really happy with the compost drop-off program that's very popular and expanding, and we're really thrilled to have over 2,000 people in Cuyahoga County dropping off their food scraps to us. So the third part of our business we call Tilth Soil. Tilth refers to means the crumbly chocolate cakey texture of good soil. And so we decided to start making blended soil products instead of selling just compost, because we were on a very, very small parking lot essentially when we started off. You'll see a few pictures of that later on. And we were thinking about, okay, how could we make more volume out of the volume of compost that we can make ourselves? Because one of the ways that we've grown through the years is that we compost a portion ourselves, and then we take the rest of the food scrap material to another larger facility that's managed by a different company that is still making it into compost. So with our small volume of material, we thought about, okay, what can we do to make more product out of this, and maybe we could get a higher margin out of it. Also, we don't want to have to explain in communities that aren't Cleveland that Rust Belt Riders isn't a motorcycle gang. So let's name it something else. So we named it Tilth Soil. And so this is some of the bagging crew, filling bags of Tilth Soil. And we think of ourselves as serving 3 market segments. We serve home gardeners, organic vegetable growers and organic-ish vegetable growers, and commercial cannabis growers in Ohio in the medical market and in Michigan in the recreational and medical market. We have a couple of products. For home gardeners, we make Sprout, which is our seed starting mix, and House, which is for house plants. And we add, the difference between those is that we add a nematode, which is a microscopic worm that eats the larva of fungus gnats. And so this is in front of a Heinen's grocery store. One of the really cool things about working with Heinen's is that they buy the soil back from us that we make from their food scraps. So it's really lovely to see in the spring and summer these displays of Tilth Soil made with the scraps that picked up from Heinen's. We work with vegetable growers. We've got certified and uncertified organic vegetable growers that buy our potting soil all the way in Washington State, Southern Florida, and Texas, as well as thankfully locally here in Ohio. It grows really good seedlings and transplants. And then we work with commercial medical cannabis growers. This is at Galenas, which is a medical cannabis operation in Akron. I worked with them to develop a mix just for their facility that works well for their systems. and they've been enjoying that for quite some time. We're really happy to see when we do trials of our stuff versus other brands of potting soil that we can visually see that there's something better about what's going on in ours, like in these cucumber seedlings, much more vigorous root growth on those. So we really strive to try to create a circular economy that can scale without accidentally becoming evil. So what we're doing is we're picking up food scraps from grocery stores. We haul it, it gets composted, and now, so that photo of this farmer is at Ohio City Farm, and they have a CSA, but it's not going directly back to Heinen's. But something that I'm really, really proud of is that Heinen's buys a lot of fruit and vegetables from the Northeast Ohio Amish community, and there are a small but growing number of organic Amish vegetable growers in Northeast Ohio that use our potting soil and compost. So we have a real life example of actual circularity happening, which I am just thrilled about and growing, and we want to keep seeing that happen. So we want to not squander our locally produced solar and soil resources. The solar and soil resources, I mean, the plants grow, they take fertility to grow, and we can capture that and bring it back. So that's something we're really proud of. And I'd say we want to get big without getting evil. And one of the ways that we think about that is that we are part of a national network through the Institute for Local Self-Reliance called the Community Composters Coalition. There are now 300 small composters in that group. We're one of the old ones in the group. It's a lot of people that have similar lack of experience to us. So, you know, I like to say in those contexts, we make mistakes so you don't have to. So we can help the new, younger composters not make the same mistakes that we have, and I'm really thrilled to do that. And I think for me, that's the way that we can get to scale without one company having to own it all. Because I'm really not interested in that. I'm much more interested in what I would call a mycorrhizal economics. If you're familiar with the way that that mycorrhizal fungi connect trees in the forest, the trees aren't one organism. They're individual organisms, but they're connected through the fungal network that grows between those trees, and that's how they share information and literal resources. So now we're going to talk about how composting works. I would say people don't make compost, microbes make compost, but people create the conditions for microbes to make compost. Just like people don't make cheese or beer or wine or yogurt, microbes make those things, but we create the conditions that allow the microbes to actually do their work. So a compost pile is a mixture. We call them the stuff in a compost pile, we call it feedstocks. So you may have heard about carbon and nitrogen or browns and greens and all those things, and there's different ways of talking about it. But when you assemble the right mixture, the right recipe of food together, microbes will start going crazy. And by microbes, I mean bacteria, archaea, and fungi. And by going crazy, I mean they're eating and reproducing and eating each other and dying very fast. And when they eat that fast and reproduce that fast, heat comes out. And when you have enough mass in a compost pile, the heat accumulates. It's like being, you know, if you're at a party with a small area, the more people show up, the hotter it gets, and the longer the party goes on, you can feel the heat from all the people dancing. The same thing is happening in a compost pile in a much more aggressive way. So the compost pile heats up, and it's really shockingly not difficult for compost piles to heat up to 150 Fahrenheit. I mean, I've seen them as high as 175, which is higher than we want them to be for a bunch of interesting reasons. But that's really amazing to me that we can assemble piles that will then kill weed seeds and diseases, so that then we can use the finished compost without having to worry about weed seeds or diseases being passed on, while making nutrients both more available but less soluble. Because one of the big problems with conventional fertilizers is that they're salt-based, and when it rains, they can run off pretty easily into our waterways, causing all sorts of havoc. One of the other, so we don't have that, and yet the compost pile retains more nutrients, but the nutrients can be metered out more slowly to the plants as the plants need them. Another important thing to say about compost is typically we want it to be aerobic, as in breathing oxygen. So we want those microbes breathing oxygen so that they can make that heat and so that it doesn't stink. So you see the question mark next to odors. Ideally, so we're going to have not very much. Is there going to be a smell? Yes. Is there such thing as no smell composting at all? I have never smelled it. I've never seen it. I've been to a lot of composting sites. You can do really well, but the idea that we're going to manage all of our extra food scraps without any smells ever isn't real, and we shouldn't expect that. That's not what life is like. So if you're going to take a screenshot of any of my slides, you should screenshot this one, because you can come back to this and think about it and figure out how to compost on your own. So the composting on any scale is the balance of foods. You want to have more carbon, more carbohydrates than you do nitrogen, which is protein. Because the microbes, just like ourselves, like, you know, some people go on diets of all protein. That's fine. Maybe it works for them for a time. But in general, most aerobic organisms need more carbs than they do protein. So we need that. We all need moisture. We all got to drink water to live. The microbes in the pile also need that. Because we're trying to go for aerobic microbes, we need airflow in the pile, and then you need time. And then, of course, finally, for a backyard compost pile like I have in my own backyard, I let that sit for a whole year. Whereas in the hot composting process that we do, I prefer to age it for a full year, but we can get through the hot composting process and cool it off in about 6 months. Some people say you can get it done in 1 month. That's another claim I've never actually seen happen, but it does happen a lot faster when you're doing hot composting on scale like we are. So when I'm saying carbon and nitrogen, carbohydrates and proteins, you know, you might not think about your fruit and vegetable scraps as having all that much protein, but compared to a pile of wood chips, there's a lot of protein in fruit and vegetable scraps. So one of the ways that we think about, and this comes from a book called The Composting Handbook, which is a really great 600-page reference book if you're ever looking for something to read when you're falling asleep. So convection is the way that our passively aerated piles heat themselves. So it creates a chimney effect so that there's cool air coming in the bottom, hot air coming out of the top from the heat of the microbes since heat rises. And here you can see this is a photo I took a couple of years ago of this is when it was getting honestly way too hot, a pile that had been snowed on and kind of created its own winter jacket. And it was getting up to, what's that say, 176 Fahrenheit. So that is screaming hot. So it basically created a layer of ice on the outside, and there was like a 2-inch air gap between the pile and this. I don't know how the exact weather conditions, but it was very interesting to see that happen. And this is where our compost is made today. This is what it looks like. So there's a big pile of carbon, and then our food scraps come in 22-ton dump trucks. And the scale of the piles is pretty big. That's me on top of one of the aging piles. So these piles are getting up to like 10 to 12 feet tall. They're 200 or 300 feet long. So we're making thousands of cubic yards of compost these days. And then for us, the final step of composting, one of the reasons that your compost at home is probably not going to look like the stuff that you buy at the store is because we screen it. And so you can see on the right side of this screener, on the right side of the screen, there's this very fine looking material coming out. And on the left side, you can see this much coarser looking material. The reason that the stuff that you make at home probably doesn't look like the stuff that you buy in a bag is because professional composters screen their compost. So now we're going to talk a bit about composting in the state of Ohio. So like I said before, there's the scale of the problem is huge. We landfill about 1.5 million tons of food every year in Ohio, or at least according to ReFed in 2021, and composted about 500,000 tons. This is a map of all the composting sites in Ohio, but most of these are landscape yards. So there's really not very many food scrap facilities around. But you know, if you're a business owner like Shannon, look up the Ohio Organics Council, which is the trade group for composters, and I am sure we can find a composter near you that can pick up your food scraps. So there's in the state of Ohio, we have a couple of different classes of compost operations. And the lower the number of the class, the more kinds of stuff you're allowed to take. So class 4 is just landscape debris, leaves, grass, wood chips. 3 includes manure and all of class 4. Class 2 includes food waste and all the above. And then class 1, fortunately, doesn't exist anymore. There was a time in the 90s and early 2000s when there were some experiments going on with trying to just compost mixed solid waste straight out of the garbage truck, basically, and then screen it out later. But that didn't work. So fortunately, those don't exist anymore, but they're still on the books in Ohio. And then also there's the quote unquote class 5, which was made up by Dr. Fred Michel at Ohio State. But if you, in the state of Ohio, there's an exemption so that if you're composting on 500 square feet or less of active composting, it's not regulated. And this was that parking lot I was telling you about when we were trying to get into, when we started getting into making potting soil. And you can see my arms are waving at that exact moment because the drone photo got taken at the exact moment that the tire on my skid steer popped. So this is a comparison of a couple of different sites that we've been working on. This is to scale. So there's the little tiny one that we just saw. There's an intermediate one, and this is a site that we're looking at as potentially being a composting site. So you can see the scale. We're really trying to scale up so we can do what much more serious food scrap diversion and composting. So for the last bit here, I borrowed this mostly from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which is a really wonderful nonprofit. So there's some serious benefits of making and using compost, though I will say, composting isn't the right solution for every situation. There's an idea of the waste recovery hierarchy or the food scrap hierarchy, where the best is to prevent it. The next best is to give it to people like G is doing. After that would be recovery for animal feed. And then later, closer to the bottom, is then food for microbes to make compost. So I think there's a lot of ways to do this, and composting is one of many important things to think about when we're dealing with food scraps. So just composting isn't the be-all, end-all of doing food scraps. It's not the right solution in every case, but it sure does have a lot of good benefits. So first, we're avoiding scraps in landfills. And we heard about that earlier, how food scraps in landfills creates methane, and methane is a really potent greenhouse gas. So it's really nice to avoid that. And so landfills are a very big source of methane in the atmosphere. Second, compost enhances soil quality. And I'm really excited for there to be more research about this, but compost improves the physical, chemical, and biological aspects of soil. Because compost has improves those things because it helps aggregate the fine structure of soil. So the sand, silt, and clay can stick together better, so it has more of that nice crumbly tilth. It helps increase the water holding capacity because the organic matter in compost can hold a lot of water, so that we both, when we don't have rain and when we have too much rain, having compost in the soil helps even those things out. And then, of course, like I said earlier, there's lots of nutrition in compost, because if you think about it, one of the things that's happening when you're making compost is that you're significantly reducing the volume. So if you have like a bathtub full of grapefruits, and now you've shrunk that down to like a third of that size, the nutrients that were in that bathtub full are now in 1/3 that size. And so that's a more concentrated area of nutrients. So that's another benefit of compost. Then probably the thing that I get the most excited about for composting is its ability to help plants sequester carbon. And now this really isn't studied enough. There is some scientific literature out there, which is pretty darn cool. But plants are made of, and our bodies are made of air and rocks and water. And then plants have their magical superpower of photosynthesis, where they are taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and making sugar and using that sugar to make more complex molecules like celluloses and hemicelluloses and lignin. And that's literally pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And what compost can do is it can it can help complement as a probiotic for soil the effectiveness and diversity of microbes in the soil, because one of the things that plants do with all that sugar they're creating is leak it out into the soil because they're feeding microbes. And they're feeding microbes because the bacteria and the fungi that live in compost and soil can pull mineral nutrients out of the sand, silt, and clay parts of the soil. And so the plant is feeding the microbes, because plants don't have teeth or stomach, unlike us, to digest their food. And so they recruit microbes to do that for them with the sugar they produce through photosynthesis. So by adding compost, you're improving the ability of the plant and the soil together to grow the plant more, which then leads to a virtuous cycle of the plant being more photosynthetically efficient, so they can pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere and in turn squirt more into the soil, where some of it can stick around as long-term carbon. And that is really, really exciting to me, because it's really important that we reduce our emissions into the atmosphere, but we don't hear nearly enough, in my opinion, about pulling emissions out of the atmosphere. And plants just want to do it. And that's really cool. And then the fourth thing is that, like, we can build community resiliency, because I know I got quit here. So when we engage in composting, one of the things that I think is so important about composting for people to do, for more and more people to do, is it gets us to think about whole cycles, that we live on an enclosed planet, that we live on a planet of systems. We don't live on a linear world. I like to say we drink the same water the dinosaurs drank, and every now and then I get a molecule that went through Abraham Lincoln. So we're always recycling things on this planet, on this closed planet. And so by composting, it improves the way that we're thinking about things. It makes it more possible to garden in degraded soils, like in all of our cities. And there's a myriad of cascading benefits that both the process of people engaging in composting and then actually making compost and then using compost is all beneficial. So it's a really, really exciting thing to be involved with. Another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is that, as far as I can tell, and all my hopes are that composting is a politically purple activity. So in these divided times, in our gloriously purple state of Ohio, I'm really proud that composting, like, nobody likes waste, nobody likes food going to the landfill, and nobody likes to see farms lose soil organic matter. So everybody agrees that increasing soil organic matter is good, and composting can help get us there. And that's my baby daughter a year ago. She's much bigger now, but she's been to 4 or 5 industrial composting sites. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you bearing with me while we had some technical difficulties at the beginning. And please send me an email at nathan@rustbeltriders.com.
Thanks, Nathan. Real quick, while everybody is putting in some questions in the pane, we just have a few minutes left on today's session. I want to thank all of our speakers again, and thank you everyone on our attendee side for bearing with us during those technical difficulties. Travis is currently switching back over to our closing slides. But in the meantime, I will just ask one question of our presenters. We know that money speaks, and a lot of small businesses are always in need of funding. So if any of you could talk about any funding that you have received to assist with your food waste reduction initiatives, I think that would be really helpful for our attendees.
Can you say that again? Was it directed to me? Sorry, I started reading people's questions.
No, that's okay. To any of the three of you, if you have received any funding, whether that be grant, donors, etc., to assist with your food waste reduction initiatives, just let our attendees know what opportunities might be out there.
I'm going to say thanks to the Ohio EPA, because we applied for and got a business development grant a couple of years ago, which is our small bagging machine, which you saw earlier in the slides. That we got that with the help of a business development grant, which has allowed us to put products in bags. Which, while I despise producing garbage, it does make it much more convenient for people to get our stuff.
I'll go ahead and chime in. And yes, we got a grant in Hennepin County in Minneapolis to start our program. I forget, it was a program that they were offering, and it helped pay for some recycling containers and part of the composting program. And it really helped me sell it to the team, because again, the castle pays for their waste. And so it was a way for me to say, hey, I don't remember what the cost was, but this may only cost you $50 a month because you're getting a grant for 6 months. So it's a great way to pilot it for our castles in that region.
Thanks, Shannon. Levi, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, and I'll answer it in a slightly different angle, looking from a producer, I guess, trying to look at food rescue. With food rescuing, there's no charge to any of the donors to donate the food to it. So that's a core piece of it. And then the other piece is that we can be flexible with how the food is packaged. So if it comes right off the line, just how it is, Shannon talked about the sandwiches and the Gaylord, whatever that packaging looks like. And then transportation is also completely free. So if food rescuing is something that you're interested in, there's really not an upfront or reoccurring cost beyond any packaging that you may need for a one-time expense.
Great, thank you all so much. I apologize, we don't have time for any other questions. If you do still have questions, you can continue to put them in the questions pane, and our speakers will get back to you after the session today. Additionally, their contact information can be provided to you, and we can follow up with you after the session today. So thank you again to all of our presenters, and thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank you one more time for your patience as we went through those technical difficulties. This webinar has been recorded. We will shorten the technical difficulty portion of it, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel where you can view it at a later date, or if you would like to share that with anybody that was not available to join today. I would also like to point your attention to a couple of Ohio EPA's programs that we offer. Like I mentioned, grant funding can be very important for small businesses or nonprofits. So Ohio EPA's yearly recycling grant program helps support communities, nonprofits, businesses, and schools to initiate or expand recycling programs, encourage sustainable practices, stimulate economic growth, and support litter prevention efforts. Applications are online, and that cycle opens on October 2nd and closes December 1st. You can visit recycleohio.gov for more information. We also offer an award program called the Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award Program. That program has 3 categories that recognize Ohio businesses, industries, trade associations, nonprofits, Ohio K-12 public or private schools, and local governments, all for their environmental stewardship commitments and practices. Again, that application is also online, and those applications are open for the 2024 award cycle. You can learn more by visiting epa.ohio.gov/OhioE3. And then as we are wrapping up here, I just want to highlight our upcoming sessions. Join us tomorrow morning to hear from members of the Ohio Materials Marketplace and the Ohio Byproduct Synergy Network on how to participate in the circular economy in Ohio. After that, attendees will hear from organizations that have received awards through Ohio EPA's Encouraging Environmental Excellence Program. A panel discussion will highlight the successes, opportunities, and challenges of those sustainability programs. And then at 1 p.m., attendees will learn about the environmental economic benefits that the reuse of contaminated property can yield. Again, once you leave today, a survey will appear, and we do value your feedback, so please fill that out if you get the chance. We will also, again, follow up to those that requested Nathan's updated slides, and you will receive a link to the recording of this session. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.